Okay, let's get started. This is Emily Blum speaking, and I'm the Executive Director of ADA 25 Advancing Leadership. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, including so many Advancing Leadership members and those who made a donation to support the accessibility of this program and series. I also want to thank today's partners. This event is co-presented by the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, otherwise known as CCAC. CCAC works to empower Chicago's cultural spaces to become more accessible to visitors with disabilities. We are also thankful for our partner, Real Abilities Film Festival Chicago. Real Abilities is dedicated to sharing the human experience of disability through art and film. Advancing Leadership member and Real Abilities Director Grishma Shah has been instrumental in putting this event together, and we are grateful for her support. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Advancing Leadership, we are a network of positive disruptors, all people with disabilities who are using our power to create an equitable and inclusive society. And we believe our experiences, ideas, and leadership as people with disabilities are vital to achieving justice. Thank you for attending our Disability Power Series and today's conversation featuring Crip Camp directors James Lebrecht and Nicole Newnham, Crip Camp's Chief Inclusion Consultant and Impact Producer Andraéa LaVant, and artist and social justice advocate Reveca Torres. They are joined in conversation with Risa Jazz-Rifkind, my colleague and our Director of Civic Engagement and Marketing. Risa also serves on the board and steering committee of CCAC. A few housekeeping notes and a few more thank yous. We send out a guide on accessing key accessibility features in Zoom, and we have both CART and ASL interpreters. If you have any challenges accessing these features, please connect with us via the chat box. My colleague Alex will be monitoring. Please also join the conversation. Submit your questions via the Q&A function, and later in the program, Alex will be posing your questions to the panelists. Also, I want to note that this convening is being recorded so that we can share it with those who weren't able to attend. And a big thank you to our sponsor, Ann Manikas, who is supporting this series. Gifts like hers make this and other events possible and accessible. And lastly, if you are a person with a disability living in the Chicago region and are interested in joining our community, we want to hear from you. In the chat box, we will put a link to our website and how you can apply to become a member. Before we begin, we want to take a moment to recognize and remember Stacy Park Milburn, who passed away last month. Stacy was part of Crip Camp's community impact team and was instrumental in helping to make this event possible. On the screen is a photo of Stacy, a mixed race Korean and white queer person holding a paper sign that reads "Cherished." I want to share an excerpt from a speech Stacy made at a UC Santa Cruz commencement ceremony. You and all of us together, we are the ones we have been waiting for. That is the essence of what I want to impart to you. No one is coming to save us, but it's okay. We are the ones we have been waiting for. There is no reason for us to feel shame for who we are. We are born into this world exactly as we are. We are who we were meant to be. That doesn't mean we can't grow and change and be better. Grow, change, be better. But also know you are a beautiful human being who deserves love and tenderness and care as you are. You do. We do. We deserve to have our boundaries listened to. We deserve respect. We deserve dignity. We deserve to have our humanity seen. We deserve an opportunity to contribute to society. If you are unfamiliar with Stacy's work, I invite you to find the hashtag Stacy Taught Us syllabus that was curated by Alice Wong. The link is in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Risa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Emily. This is Risa, and I am so excited to be here with you today. And my background is a Black background with our Advancing Leadership colors of pink and purple lines, and hopefully it highlights my pink lipstick today. And I have short brunette hair, and I'm a woman of color. So with that, my style of moderating is right to the point, asking good questions and just letting the panelists take it away. So with that, I want to do just that and turn it over to our panelists with the first question. of asking each of you to identify yourself. How do you describe yourself? And in the context of how do you claim power as a person with a disability, or how does Crip Camp claim power? And I'll just say, Nicole, why don't you go first, because you're right to my right, and then we can go from there. Oh, Nicole, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Hi, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for hosting this conversation. I'm Nicole Newnham, and I'm one of the co-directors and producers of Crip Camp with Jim Lebrecht. And I am a 50-year-old white woman with shoulder length, kind of brownish hair, and I'm sitting in front of a brownish wall. And I think that one of the most profound ways that Crip Camp claims power is by being a film that's told from the perspective of a storyteller with a disability, which is Jim Lebrecht. And I think one of the other ways that it claims power is by being a film co-directed and produced by a person with a disability about disability history. That has been, picked up by Netflix and executive produced by the Obamas, and just sort of, by navigating through those media platforms and those companies, always coming from the, perspective of the people in the film and the filmmaker being people with disabilities. I think we've been able to claim some power in a way that's been, fairly extraordinary. It's one way.
Thank you. Reveca, why don't you go next?
Thank you. Like Nicole said, thank you so much for including me as well in this panel. My name is Reveca Torres. I am an artist, and I'm also the founder and director of an organization called Backbones, and a co-director for the Real Abilities Film Festival here in Chicago. I'm a Mexican-American disabled woman from a spinal cord injury, and I use a power chair. I have brown eyes, brown hair, shoulder length. Today I'm wearing a white t-shirt, and behind me you can see my office and fireplace and a TV. And in regards to the way that I claim power as an artist, I think I do that through my art, whether it's visual art or using writing, storytelling, just talking to people, telling people my story. But I also think showing up and being present out in the community, and showing up and being present for my peers and my fellow people with disabilities when they are, when they have something going on, being there to support the community, I think is very important.
Thank you, Reveca. Andraéa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, and super thank you all for having me today. My name is Andraéa LaVant, and I'm serving as impact producer for the Crip Camp impact campaign. And I am Black woman, and I am sitting in my power wheelchair. And where am I? In Tempe, Arizona. It's hard to know where you're at these days. But I'm in Tempe, Arizona, outside of Phoenix. I am wearing a black and white dress today with kind of a crisscross pattern. I have glasses and cat eye glasses, and my curly hair is swooped over to one side, and I am also wearing some pink lipstick for the occasion. I'm sitting in my living room / home office with a bunch of colorful things in the background, most particularly my teal couch that I love a lot. And let's see, how do I claim power? I think I intentionally claim power by, especially, now, and we'll talk about this more, but rather than kind of dancing around the word, I just say I'm a Black woman. I'm a Black disabled woman, and that I think, as opposed to some other things right now, means a lot to me. And so I just like to be very frank with all of those pieces of my identity. And that just, to me, fills a space. I also take up space in all of the ways that, you know, I can, and all. And one of the things that for me personally that I appreciate the opportunity to do is to be in spaces and places that don't necessarily talk about disability or speak disability on the regular. So in the corporations, in the organizations, you know, where they aren't necessarily, their eyes aren't necessarily open, and yet if there's some way for me to, you know, push through the door, then that's one way that I really like to claim power. And then the other big thing is just having a heart for young people and even the kind of next generation of this movement, and just having conversations with them is probably my favorite thing. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jim.
Hi, and again, thank you for inviting us. This is extremely meaningful to be in conversation with all of you today. My name is Jim. I'm a he, him is how I identify. I am sitting in my home office that looks like it's auditioning for the next episode of Hoarders. That's why I've positioned my camera very, very carefully so you can't see all the stuff that's still packed in here for making the film. I am a 64-year-old white man wearing glasses. I've got longish hair and I've got a knit cap on, and a Grateful Dead t-shirt because I'm a bit deadhead. And how do I claim, you know, I echo a lot of things that like Reveca said and Andraéa said in regards to, I try to be out in the community. I try to be supportive of organizations, but also within the industry, the entertainment industry. I have pushed for, I have worked for many years as a sound mixer and had a post-production sound company working on films, and I've pushed very hard for inclusion of people with disabilities in the industry, which means advocating for accessibility of not only physical spaces, but just the, you know, the perceptual, you know, in other words, no one's going to invite you if they don't think you can do the job or don't exist out there. So really advocating within the documentary world for a number of years for inclusion. When we're talking about diversity and inclusion, that folks, you know, can't ignore folks with disabilities, and that so I think that's how I've been showing up, and that's how I claim it, and it's been remarkable to see the kind of how Crip Camp has sparked a lot of movement towards all of these goals that, in fact, all of us share.
This is Lisa. Thank you all so much for the great introduction. Certainly better than I could have introduced you, so appreciate that. I'm going to go in reverse order, so Jim, you can get ready to talk next. But my next question, you know, Andraéa, you said something of like claiming power by talking about disability in spaces that aren't talking about disability. And for me, growing up, I didn't learn disability history in school. I wish I knew enough when I was a kid to bring that up, but I didn't. So watching Crip Camp, part of what was so powerful for me was seeing that leadership and power was really being built by within the community. And I'm wondering, Jim, to start, like, how do we start to get more of these voices and stories told? Crip Camp is certainly doing that in a very big way on Netflix, but how do we continue that?
Well, I will say that my sense of talking to people is that there is a Crip Camp effect in regards to projects within Hollywood that have a disability center are getting more and more meetings. That there are, I think Crip Camp has proven that there's a wealth of stories that have yet to be told, and that it doesn't, when it comes to disability, it doesn't have to be all tragedy or overcoming unsurmountable odds. Although I must say that getting the 504 regulation signed was a story of overcoming incredible odds. I think that I think that we need to just consistently be out there kind of supporting the current generation of folks. And that I think that searching out our community and the people that are out there is vitally important. And that it is always up to, ourselves to educate ourselves. And that there are plenty of resources out there for people to get more connected and to learn about people with different disabilities coming from different cultures and races, and that those things are vitally important because that kind of community grows much more power. And
Oh, this is Lisa. I'm not sure
I think
if
that
we...
with the
Oh,
development.
there we are. Sorry, Jim, you cut out for a second, but I think you're back.
So sorry. I would just say that, we all have to be vocal about what we want to see, and that fortunately, you can point to our film and few other shows nowadays that are really kind of paving the way in regards to disability, and people with disabilities in shows, and it not being about just their disability.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. And Andraéa, did you want to add anything to what Jim said on the original question of how do we continue to get more stories and voices heard and told?
Number one, I think we ask. It seems simple, and yet our goal as an impact campaign has been to create space in as many ways as possible, knowing that we're in a virtual world, and so it may not have even looked like what the original intent may have been. But, our goal has been to create space through various programs to at least get people talking, and then we're watching, and we're again trying to bring those, even the organizations, into the fold, thinking about other movements, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But while the spotlight is kind of on us, to just get people to see not just even the traditional stories, but more of these people in communities that we don't know about that are just, whether it's doing amazing work or just have these lived experiences that we need to know about. But I think it's like we're seeing a lot around Black Lives Matter, where people are like, oh wait, let me ask some questions and see who's out there. It's the same thing that needs to happen in disability. And then for those of us, when we do get to places and and have opportunities, that we bring people along with us. And that's what I think has been another great, been so great about the Impact campaign, and with the film team and how open they've been to just allowing us to kind of take it and go, okay, who else can we bring? Who else can we talk to? Who, and elevate as many voices as possible. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm gonna come to Rebecca and Nicole in 1 second, but Andraéa, I think the virtual nature of the Crip Camp virtual camp opportunity has really allowed perhaps more voices to be heard and shared with more people. Travel not being a barrier, other barriers certainly of technology and accessibility, recognizing that, but I think it has been really powerful to hear so many stories that maybe we all didn't know yet. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, but I think that's a perfect example of how we adapt to the current situation to do that.
You're exactly right. I think we originally had some ideas for some in-person things, and like you said, that would have engaged some people, and that would have been great. And yet, by taking this virtual, I always talk about how when Stacey and I were kind of dreaming this up and going, do you think we could maybe get 1,000 people, to participate? And we have close to 8,000 people that have registered, and they're from all over the world. And they, at least 20%, I think, at our last count, were international participants. And just seeing what's happening on Facebook. And we've been very intentional about kind of not usurping space or taking over spaces, but actually allowing things to, or not even allowing, because that makes it sound like we're, some overlord, but really hopeful that people will create their own spaces and own communities based on this. And that's what we're seeing with, Facebook groups, and even what happens on Twitter, and just so many other things. I talked to a friend the other day who was saying that during the fireside chats that we do, which are like where we have these break moments during the sessions where people can answer like a journaling prompt. And she was saying that she and another friend of hers actually do it together, like over the phone. They're not in the same location, but they are like on, the phone or on, some other platform, and they're using that time to connect. So we're just seeing really, cool ways that people are engaging. And yet I often say this is what we do well anyway, right? Like this innovation and as disabled folks. So yeah, it's pretty great.
That's great. And then for people who might not be familiar with what we're talking about, this is a virtual every Sunday evening, 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. There are weekly gatherings, and people can still sign up by going to the Crip Camp website. So if you haven't yet, I encourage everyone to check it out. So I'm gonna go back to Rebecca. The question is, how do we continue to get more stories told? And would love your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree a lot with, everything that Andraéa just said. And, by providing opportunities for more storytelling, and, there's so many platforms to do that, whether it's film or art, blogging, social media, whatever it is, there's opportunities to do that. But also, I think, you mentioned something about the innovation within our community, and that's so true because, often I think there's a lot of professional development opportunities, but they don't always necessarily feel accessible to us. And I think we can create our own, and help elevate people that are just starting to learn. Maybe they're an emerging artist, emerging filmmaker, emerging whatever. Like Andraéa said, you bring them along with you, and have giving these people an opportunity to have more opportunities and more platforms to share their stories. So, and I guess sometimes it, lastly, sometimes it just means, getting out of the way and letting someone else share their story, and being willing to do that, and being aware that you should do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think getting out of the way is a really important thing, because sometimes, right, that just blocks more voices from being heard. Nicole, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that it, to me, like, so, you know, coming into the film industry when I did, like, almost 30 years ago or something, as a woman, I felt like there were a lot of presumptions about things I couldn't do, or rooms I couldn't be in or would never be in the industry. And that I've seen that shift. And I think that so many of the things that were important about making that happen for women are also important about breaking down the barriers. And at least in just thinking about, like, the film and television industry, which is just obviously one tiny part of storytelling. I think those things, you know, like, basically getting people in writers' rooms, getting people to be on the boards of the nonprofit organizations that support independent storytelling, you know, bringing the perspective of disability and training about disability history, disability justice, you know, to organizations that are, you know, exist to promote diverse perspectives, but until recently had not really included disability in their definition of diversity, is really important. And that's some work that that we've been trying to be involved in as we went throughout because we've worked on Crip Camp for about 5 years. So throughout the 5 years, you know, when we would get invited to a professional development opportunity, if it wasn't accessible, we would, you know, fight that fight. We have really seen a lot of positive developments and improvements over the last 5 years, but I feel like we're still kind of at the very beginning of that. And I think one of the things that I'm, you know, the most excited about, well, I don't know what I'm most excited about, but one of the very exciting things that Andraéa and Stacy dreamed up is this idea of a fellowship to support creatives who are trying to get their projects to the next level, and they'll be mentored by people who have really achieved something in their field with a disability. And Jim and I also get to you know, to support that storytelling. So I'm really excited about it, and I think we do feel like we're starting to see you know, a real awareness that the sort of specificity and richness of these different experiences that people aren't aware of is something really valuable, and within the industry. And I think you know, I was just thinking that somebody asked us this morning something to the effect of, like, were you trying really intentionally to make, like, fully human portraits of the characters in Crip Camp, to really humanize people? And we weren't really. I mean, of course we wanted to do that, but that's like how you tell a good story and how you make a good film, you know. It's just that so much of the storytelling from Hollywood and the industry around disability, people with disabilities, have just been confined to these very specific roles. And so I think, you know, just breaking out of that, however it can possibly be done, is going to lead to, you know, so much more rich storytelling, and I think it's really exciting.
You know, there's one important thing that in talking to, let's say, the Motion Picture Academy around membership of people with disabilities, but which is really a much broader thing, is that people have to be willing to identify as disabled. And that there's so much stigma involved, especially when you have a hidden disability, that, you know, I might lose my job, or I might be considered, you know, the one with diabetes versus the one that's really good at writing scripts. But I think that there is a benefit for the industry to know that there's many more people than they realize with disabilities, or a strong connection to disability in their lives. That takes a little bit of a risk, but overcoming stigma is something that is holding all of us back in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, Jim, Nicole, thank you so much for that. You know, I want to come back to the need for more people to self-identify, and also the lack of leadership of lack of people with disabilities in leadership positions, like on nonprofit boards, because that is totally aligned with what advancing leadership is looking at. I'm going to come back to that, so hold those thoughts. But my next question is, in Crip Camp, there was a story, a sharing of how powerful civil rights groups like the Black Panthers supported and contributed to the disability rights movement. And I'm wondering from you, how can we continue to keep this intersectional approach moving forward, especially in this moment where we have seen, white supremacy play out in the violent murders of people of color and people of color with disabilities as well. And I know, Andraéa, you mentioned Black Lives Matter movement already, but I'm gonna let anyone jump in because I don't want to roll call forever. So anyone who wants to start, please do.
I can say some about that. I think it's similarly. I mean, I know that it's been a personal desire of mine, for a long time to be in certain spaces thinking about certain organizations that may focus on other areas of, even my personal identity. So like as a Black person, goodness, I really would love if the NAACP, came out and, talked about disability or whatever. And I'm grateful that, in this time, and it even kind of before the past few weeks, that was really, Stacy and I, again, when we were talking about Crip Camp, was, thinking about the cross movement solidarity, which, even when you look at disability justice, the principles, thinking about that and cross thinking about social justice broadly. And so that was something that we were really intentional about thinking through strategy. And so that's why, for example, we're grateful to have been able to develop a partnership with Color of Change, and that's who we're doing our emergency relief fund with, and just kind of start nurturing relationships. So I think that, it's being present, joining, whether it's volunteer boards, sometimes it's not the, we don't see the straightaway in, but it's kind of, making our way through. I can think of multiple organizations that I'm like, I'm just going to go to this event, and then I'm going to see what other events they have, and then I'm going to, you know what I mean, and kind of, like I said earlier, push my way through the door. But sometimes that's what unfortunately has had to happen. And then there are other organizations, quite frankly, that feel more open to. And Crip Camp, what I love about Crip Camp is, we say it's a conversation starter. And so it's been great because we don't have to give people like a long list of articles to read or a book to read. We can just say, hey, will you watch this, this film? It's less than 2 hours. And what we've seen is it does open the door for more conversation and ability to address longer term issues. And so we're really seeing that in various areas with organizations and movements that perhaps we haven't felt like we've been able to address before. So.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the next panelist who wants to jump in with a quick reminder to the audience that in about 10 minutes, we'll be shifting to questions from the audience. So feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A function. So whoever wants to add in, please do.
I was so concentrated on Andraéa's answer that I think I lost the specific question. And maybe it's because I'm hitting my mid-afternoon slump. Would you mind repeating it, please?
I understand. It's really the question of recognizing that in Crip Camp, there were stories about how, the Black Panthers supported the disability rights movement, and how do we keep an intersectional approach to our work, to our work of inclusion in this moment as well.
Well, I think that fortunately that our impact campaign is very, very much focused on intersectionality, but that it's important for us to speak up wherever we are. And it's not, as a disabled person, it's not just being involved with issues around disability, but it's really speaking up about the full community of people with disabilities. And that means looking out for ableism against other disabilities. It looks at making sure that inclusion includes people, really looking out for racism and ableism wherever you go, and being willing to stick your neck out if that's really what it's going to take to say something or to stop a conversation. And when you do that, not only are you're also modeling for other people how to do it themselves. And so I'm not suggesting that people take risks that are going to cause them anxiety or pain or hurt them. But what I'm saying is you need to get engaged and well beyond your specific identity.
I agree with that. This is Reveca. You know, learning from each other, learning from different movements outside of our own, I think is really important. And, you know, after, like you mentioned, Risa, about not knowing about the history of disability, after watching Crip Camp, you know, I went down the rabbit hole and just was trying to learn as much as I could. And then, you know, currently right now, with the Black Lives Matter, you know, there's been a lot of information that I didn't know, and I took it upon myself to learn. And I think, you know, doing that, learning from other movements, and listening, and you know, one thing I really liked about the film, and learning about the Black Panthers, you know, stepping in and helping, was that they didn't come in and say, this is what we're gonna do. They sort of were like, how can we help? And let the leaders in the disability community take the lead and direct what was going to happen. Another thing I wanted to mention too was, you know how people say, like, what is your love language? I think that there's like a advocacy language type thing, because, you know, some people like to be out there in protest. Some people like to write letters. Some people, you know, make a video. We all have different ways that we approach advocacy and change. And I think that they're all very, very valid ways of doing it, and all have a space within, you know, making change. So, you know, not necessarily, you know, criticizing someone for doing it a certain way or another. I think, you know, supporting each other would be a better avenue.
Yeah, this is Lisa, Reveca. I think that's really interesting. You know, with our technology also come ways to protest and show up that, you know, are equally important to the sit-ins and the in-person protest. So, you know, I echo that, and I know there's been a toolkit that's been put out about how we can all participate, even if we can't do so in person. And so I think that's really key. Nicole, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question that, you know, will help you to get your thoughts on the former question, but also this new question, going back to that leadership thought. So at Advancing Leadership, you know, our vision is to have people with disabilities lead with power and influence for full participation and equal opportunity. And, you know, I think part of that has to do, we look at Q, you know, where do we volunteer on nonprofit boards, and how do we bring forward our disability identity, our disability lens into that work? But what do you hope that today's emerging leaders with disabilities will bring to that, those future and current leadership positions?
Yeah, I mean, I already see it's so powerful. I mean, I feel like I'm very, very lucky to be working with Stacy and Andraéa and kind of seeing that like living example every single day. You can see, we're on a phone call with Facebook or Google or whatever, like, that these, that the perspective is so different. And I think it's like, uh, you know, a lot of times the way that film impact campaigns are structured is that the campaign is kind of run by the filmmakers, and maybe like an impact producer who specializes in running impact campaigns is hired, and then maybe people from the community are brought in as consultants, or organizers, to bring people to events and connect with the community. And what we realized kind of early on is that we were going to have to kind of flip that model if we wanted to do something powerful. And so essentially we took all the resources that we had gathered for the impact campaign and the platform and everything, and we pretty much said to Stacy and Andraéa, like, what do you want to do? So I guess it's a little bit like what Reveca said about stepping back and letting somebody else tell their story. I think it's that kind of stepping back and let somebody else say, what's needed, what would be powerful, what would be innovative, what is going to like open the door for other people, what connections can be made, because those people are close to the community, the lived experience, and know what needs to happen. And so it's been quite extraordinary to feel, because I've done impact campaigns on other films the other way. It's been very extraordinary for me to see and feel the difference. And the other thing I just wanted to say kind of more generally about intersectionality is, I have found that learning about, there was an incredible Crip Camp, virtual Crip Camp session on the history of Black disabled activism that was last weekend. And I found that perspective was so helpful to me, not only in kind of learning about that, which was very powerful, but in just kind of like getting a broader, deeper understanding of the larger forces that are oppressing people, and of the kind of colonial history and capitalist history that we all share that have impacted, everybody. So I think that lens can be applied to people who are working on social justice in schools and any kind of institutional setting, on immigration. And I think it's going to be, not only is going to advance the cause of people with disabilities, but it's going to be liberating and empowering for everybody.
Thank you. So again, Jim, Andraéa, Reveca, is there anything specifically for emerging leaders with disabilities that you hope they would learn in this moment, take with them to their future position, or even allies?
I think at least what's been important to me, even though I'm not an emerging, leader, is to really do my homework, and that it's not up to others to kind of talk us through this, but we need to really kind of step up and do our own education. So for me, like an important resource, there's been two important resources for me. One of them has been Alice Wong's Disability Visibility Project. Her website and following her has been incredibly, it just opens my mind every time I'm there or I get an email. The other one was that the Sins Invalid came out with a disability justice handbook, and that it's available on their website. And I found that reading it gave me a great deal of knowledge that I didn't know I didn't have. And that I have an appreciation for the fact that ignorance is not benign, but it's really actually can be really harmful. So, I mean, I think those are kind of the important things to really kind of think about.
This is Lisa. Thanks, Jim. I think it's basically time. to switch to Q&A from the audience. I know there's so much more we can all say, but I want to give space for the audience to get engaged. So what's going to happen is my colleague Alex Perez Garcia is going to make her voice known. She's not going to come on camera, but she will read the questions one by one. So Alex, why don't you read the first one?
Hi, this is Alex speaking. Our first question is from Stephanie. Thank you all for sharing your insights today. I have a curious filmmaker/editor question. What for you was the most challenging or controversial part of the story to edit that caused internal debate and discussion?
Good question.
Wow. You know, I think that our, Nicole's, if I could start answering this question.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think our relationship has been based on trust and knowing each other for a long time. And also this really true environment of believing that in the long run, that if one of us was unhappy, that they would be hurt. And that we wouldn't, there was never a power play. There was never a time where we kind of went, well, you don't know what you're doing. It's like if we couldn't convince each other of a thought or a question, that sometimes we tabled it, but we always came back and found a consensus or an understanding. And that could take a day, that could take 3 months. And so there were certainly times where I wasn't understanding certain things in the film, but I think that it wasn't so controversial, but it was more just understanding the language of what was going on. And so Nicole, what do you say about all of that?
I mean, it's funny because it wasn't really a story where, as an editing team, you know, Jim and I, but also our editors, where there was a lot of controversy. It was more like we really all had this dedication to letting the footage and the experiences that we, you know, had brought into the edit room kind of reveal to us what the story needed to be, which may sound kind of, you know, abstract, but it was really true. We really didn't want to come in with like a very preconceived idea. So we were constantly moving things around, having test screenings, seeing what was striking people and what wasn't. And I think probably the biggest kind of editorial struggle that we had actually was like, how do we balance the personal and the political? How can we have Jim as a character who kind of guides us into this world, but also like let people know that this isn't a biopic and it's not Jim's story, you know? And then for the perspective to be kind of carried forward from Jim to Denise or Judy or Lionel or whomever the other characters were. And that was really tricky to figure out how to do and how to get the balance of it right, you know? It was also really hard to figure out how to create a language that would let us spend the first 40 minutes of the film in the camp, just completely immersed in that world, but then let people know that we are kind of switching gears and going into what all of our characters experienced outside of camp, but now we were going to be finding people in this like historical news footage, you know? It took us a really long time to figure out how to crack that one, to the extent that we had people coming back and saying like, well, are you sure maybe the whole film should be in the camp? Or, you know, is this 2 films? It feels like 2 chapters. And we just kept at it and at it and at it and at it until we finally figured out how to make it feel like, oh, wow, okay, there's Judy, and there's Neil and Denise in the protest, and to kind of constantly bring it back to those characters who are experiencing the further history that we were continuing to follow.
Great. Thank you. Another question is from Vaughn. So throughout Crip Camp, many folks noted that they did not have many role models with disabilities growing up. How do you think viewing Crip Camp on Netflix and a mass media platform as a child with a disability in this current moment can be impactful to those children?
Well, one of the things that we kind of talk about basically is how do you know a better life is possible if you don't see it displayed for you? And so I think that when you see older folks with disabilities who have jobs, who have families, who are really engaging in life, you know, you don't have to be like on 14 different boards and, you know, running the food bank at the same time, but that you can see that people are really living lives of their own choosing, that then you know that if it's possible for them, maybe it's possible for me. And you can look at this film and see what the lessons are. And the lessons of the film, I think one of the most important lessons is how important community is, and to engage with other people. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, if you're a kid, your parents don't have to all of a sudden figure this out, that there are resources out there if they can find it. And if you're a kid with a disability, there's so many other kids out there just like you. And they are going through the same joys and the same grief that you're going through. You just have to kind of, you know, you have to see that and engage with it and find a way to do that. And, you know, certainly for me, one of those ways was my parents were able to get me into a summer camp. But there are other ways to engage. And even in the time of COVID, I believe that there's ways for us to get engaged online that are meaningful and are joyous and are uplifting.
This is Lisa. Maybe I don't want to put you on the spot, Rebecca, but I'm curious if you have thoughts on, you know, putting more people with disabilities on the screen like Crip Camp does, and how that translates to role models.
Well, yeah, I became disabled at 13, so I was a child and didn't really have other people that I knew with disabilities until I went to college. And when I started meeting other people with disabilities, I think it created, like Jim said, a community and peers that I could look to and see that, you know, I could do that too. I can travel, I can go to school, I can have a job, I can date. And so I think it's very, very impactful to have films such as these, such as Crip Camp, that not only tells the history, but also shares that community, shares joy, and also things that are challenges. I forgot where I was going with this. It was good. Yeah, I just think it's important to have those stories told, and I also recall, you know, watching films as a kid where there's a person in a wheelchair, and you know, the same tropes that, you know, it was so sad, and it always made me feel so uncomfortable, and I didn't really know why until now that I can sort of put that language to it of, like, you know, what is inspiration porn and what is ableism. So, you know, I think it does a lot of good in the sense that we also get to learn about our history and about where our place is in the world, and that we have a space and we belong in it.
Can I just say that, Andraéa, you worked with the Girl Scouts for America, right? For how many years?
7.
And so I'm wondering what I'm dying to know kind of what your answer is here for the perspective of having worked with the Girl Scouts.
Yeah, we need to see people that look like us. I mean, it's like, to me, it's that, you know, I was having this conversation, as a matter of fact, with Alice Long yesterday about, you know, growing up in a family that was very, you know, my parents went to a historically Black college. So, you know, there was this concept of Black pride that you know, resonated throughout our family. But the concept of disability pride didn't enter my life until the early, you know, until I was in my late 20s. And so the idea that young people, that whoever sees this, you know, the film, can be introduced to that just by happening to flip through, you know, a Netflix, is just, that's powerful. And it reminds me of, you know, not to be political, but it reminds me of the stories that came out with, you know, when President Obama was elected, and, you know, now people seeing themselves as the president, and they never would have thought that that could have, you know what I mean? Like, that wasn't a thing when you look at the history of all the presidents that came before, right? And so having, you know, this film that can go, oh wait, there's me, you know? And so that, you know, and then knowing even that the film was created by, you know, a person with a disability is yet another layer. And so, yeah, there's just so much power there. And just, again, having worked with a lot of girls and trying to do, you know, having to create a lot of programs to help them even accept themselves. This does a very quick job of doing that. So I think it's great.
Can I jump in again? Because it triggered a thought. You know, something James said earlier about having that stigma of like identifying as someone with a disability. And, you know, the moment when that sort of shifts to become pride, that is, it's an awesome thing to have pride in your community and to feel this connection. And I think, you know, for me, it transformed the way that all my artwork and the way that the voice that I had through my art when I developed pride in the disability community instead of shame.
And I would say that often we develop pride when we know that there's a history and there's a work that's been done. And so going back to the story of, I knew about Malcolm X, I knew about Martin Luther King, I knew about, you know, all of these other, you know, figures in the Black community, not necessarily because it was taught in school, but because it was taught in my home. And so I had this pride because I knew that all this work had been done and there was this history. And that's what Crip Camp does. It tells that story to where you're like, wait a second, oh my goodness, this is so cool. I want to be a part. Not only do I want to be a part and active, but I can be proud of this because all of these people have come before me.
This is such amazing. This is Lisa. This is such amazing conversation. Vaughn, thank you for that question because I think it really resonated with a lot of panelists, obviously, and myself too. I look forward to when I can see myself represented soon by more public figures and leaders. So with that, we're out of time, which is wild. But I want to invite our Executive Director, Emily Blum, to come up, make some exciting announcements, and close out.
Yeah, thank you, Risa. Thank you, James, Jim, Nicole, Andraéa, Reveca. Honestly, I think this conversation could have gone on much longer, but we want to get people going on their evenings, but thank you so much. Thank you also to all of our guests who joined today, and a big thank you to all those who donated, and our Power Series sponsor and board member, Ann Manicus. You help make this and our other virtual events accessible and equitable, and to our partners, CCAC and Real Abilities Film Festival, a really special thanks. So before we conclude this event, we have a few exciting announcements. Our panelists teed up this next announcement very well. So please join us for July 14th for Disability Visibility, featuring activist Alice Wong. She was mentioned a couple times this evening. She is the editor of Disability Visibility, and she will be joining in conversation with Sky Cub, who's a contributor to her new book. And the conversation will be moderated by Advancing Leadership Fellow Derek Dawson. So a link to register for that is in the chat. join our network of positive disruptors. If you are a person with a disability living in the Chicago region and are interested in joining our community, visit ada25chicago.org/apply to become a member. We are opening our application soon to become a 2021 Leadership Institute Fellow, so stay tuned for that in the next few weeks. If you would like to continue to see Advancing Leadership produce accessible events like these, please consider contributing to our program at ada25chicago.org/donate. And finally, please stay engaged with us. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Medium, all those good places where we will be publishing this video and recap of this event for you to watch again or share with your friends and family. And with that, thank you and good night.